It's a small event, as you can see, but I think it's a significant event because it commemorates two things. In 2014, we became aware that we had been restored for now 2 whole centuries. As Father Bukunori explained, the Jesuits had been suppressed in 1773, and the reasons for that suppression, he's outlined them. In some ways they were too successful. In other ways they were getting a little bit too big for their boots. We were getting rather, Jesuit pride was getting a bit too much, and this was one of the reasons why there was a lot of jealousy about the power that the Jesuits had at that time. But I'm not going to repeat what Fidela said. But it was restored in 1814 after a lot of struggles and so on. And so we had the commemoration 6 years ago. And part of the commemorations was a lecture at Arupe University, where the professor of history at the University of Zimbabwe, Professor Ray Roberts, made the remark. He was invited to talk about the Jesuits and the suppression and so on. He made the remark that, why don't you Jesuits honor your founders, the founders of the Zambezi mission? And if I ask even the people who are here today, who was the founding superior of the Jesuit Zambezi mission in 1879, 11 years before the pioneers came, and 15 years before Chishawasha mission was founded? Anybody able to answer the question? Who was the superior? A bar of chocolate for whoever can get the right answer.
Dipperton.
Who?
Dipperton.
Yeah, but you know, you're not supposed to answer. So it was Father Henry de Pelchen, and you won't find his name anywhere around here. You can look everywhere. The only person who's of the early Jesuits who is remembered in this cemetery is Father Law, and that cross there, that rather large cross, is where his remains are kept, are interred. Father Law died down in right down on the border between Mozambique and Zimbabwe, and we don't quite know whether he died in Mozambique or whether he died in Zimbabwe, but it's right on the border. And his brother eventually paid for the cross that you see over there. Now, he was very English, so I do not understand why he's got an Irish cross, but anyway, that's another problem. But there were 11 Jesuits who came up in 1879, and their names are written on this plaque, which Father Provincial is going to unveil. 6 of them were priests from 4 different countries, and 5 of them were brothers, also from 4 different countries. So this group of 11 people came up at the speed of 15 kilometers a day. You know, we normally travel at 60 kilometers an hour, or maybe more. Some of us go 120 kilometers an hour. But they did 16 kilometers a day on average by ox wagon. And they came up from Grahamstown in the south up to, they had to avoid as far as possible there were wars on, so they came up the, if you like to say, the western side into Botswana. And they stopped at the capital of the chief of the Tswana at that time, who was also had the name Kama. Kama is a great name amongst the Tswana. But he already had missionaries. He had the London Missionary Society, the Protestants, and he wasn't prepared to welcome the Jesuits. So he said, "You're very welcome, but keep going. You can stay a night or two, but keep moving. We don't want you here because you'll confuse things." So they had to keep moving up. They eventually came to the boundary of what we call Zimbabwe today, where there was a gold mine called Tati, Old Tati. And they were welcome there, but there were very few people living there. But they started a little mission there, and that became a kind of a base. Then they moved on to Bulawayo. It was called Gubulawayo, where they were welcomed by Lobengula, but not very warmly welcomed. They were allowed to stay, but not to preach, not to teach, not to do anything. You can come and stay here, but don't do anything. So they came and they settled, hoping that this situation would change and the king would change his mind and allow them to teach and to preach. But he didn't change his mind. He stuck to his guns. I don't want any disturbance of the order that we have established here in this Ndebele kingdom. However, they used Bulawayo as a good base. It was a healthy place, it was a good place, and they developed two missions. One went to the east and one went to the north. The one that went to the east went over to what we now would call the Shangaan area, and there were two priests and two brothers. One of the priests got lost, can you believe it? He was saying his breviary, saying his prayers, and he wandered away from the wagon, and he couldn't find his way back. So he was literally lost in the bush, and nobody could find him. They spent 3 days looking for him, and he was lost. By this time, they had crossed the Save River, and they were out of Lobengula's area of influence, and they were amongst people who didn't know anything about them, and they were a little bit hostile, and they felt they had to leave the wagon. The going was so difficult, and they walked, the three remaining, they walked to Umzila's place, which I've mentioned is somewhere on the boundary between. I've tried to ask Crispin Matsilele exactly where this place was. Crispin Matsilele is the great grandson of Chief Umzila. You know that? And but he doesn't know where it is either. So at the moment, Father Walter Nyatsanza is trying to pinpoint where exactly Umzila's really is. At any rate, Law, Augustus Law, who's buried there, was so exhausted and so badly affected by malaria. You know, the Jesuits knew all about treatment for malaria. They treated everybody else except themselves. And many of the early people died. And Law was one of them. And you remember the priest had got lost, so that he was with two brothers. One was a Belgian, de Sadler, and the other was an Englishman, Brother Headley. De Sadler was the only healthy guy amongst them. And he went back to try and get the wagon and to come up with it with supplies, because Headley and Law were just prostrated by malaria. And eventually Law died, and Brother Headley, very sick himself, managed to bury him, but decided that the only thing he could do was follow the other brother back to the wagon and then make some future plan. They got back to the wagon. Meanwhile, this priest who'd been lost for literally 6 weeks reappeared, and they decided the only thing to do was to go down to the Mozambique coast at Sofala to try and get supplies. And they came back, and when they got to Sofala, that priest died. So both priests died, and there was only the two brothers. You know, it's an amazing story about the brothers in the early Jesuit history of this mission. That gate at the end of the drive there, if you look at it someday, just stop and have a look at that gate. It's unbelievably strong and also very highly decorated. That's the work of the early Jesuit brothers in Chishawasha. And we had many of them in those days, and they did amazing work. At any rate, these two brothers decided the only thing to do was to come back to Bulawayo. And so they came back. They'd been 18 months away, and they had achieved nothing. They achieved nothing because they didn't found a mission, they didn't convert anybody, they didn't preach the gospel or anything. It was a real, if you like, failure. De Pelchen then decided, well, even when he sent the people to Umzilas, he had also sent people north to a trading center on the boundary of Botswana and Zimbabwe today, called Pandamatenga, which the Bishop of Wankie has now made into a kind of a shrine, because it was the first place that the church was established in Wankie. And they started a mission there, and again, there were no people there, so it was only a kind of a place to stop. And they decided to go to the Tonga area where they could be welcomed. But they went to the Tonga area where again the priest died and the brother was able to kind of get back and so on. Later on, they went across the river up into the Lozi territory and they were welcomed there, but they were not ready to settle, so they said, we'll come back next year. Well, for various reasons, they were unable to come back next year, and that mission was closed to them because of the influence of the traders and the influence of the Protestants, who in those days Protestants and Catholics didn't get on very well. There was a lot of competition between them. The superior, De Pelchen, by this time was exhausted and had handed over to somebody else called Father Weld, and Weld decided to withdraw everybody down south except Father Prestige, who had started a mission at Mpandeni. And Mpandeni was the only mission that survived from that early period, and even that was abandoned for a time. So, very briefly, we had these 11 people. They were reinforced with other people over the 10 or 11 years, but originally there were 11 people whose names are there, who were the founders of what we call our Zambezi mission, which preached the gospel on our side of the Zambezi and the north side of the Zambezi, right up to Kasisi, near Lusaka, and over in the east and over towards Livingstone and so on. The mission, the big mission in Zambia was Chikuni in the beginning. Now there's lots more to say, but I just wanted to say to you, what we're doing today is to unveil a plaque which commemorates both of these events. The restoration of the Society of Jesus in 1814, which we celebrated in 2014, but we're just a little bit late in putting up the plaque. So we decided to have this plaque which commemorated the two events, the restoration in 1814 and the subsequent effort of the Jesuits in the 19th century to restart their missions all over the world and to open new ones. And one of the new ones they opened some 50, 60 years after the restoration was the Zambezi mission. And so this little plaque here has got the 11 names of the people who came up by ox wagon at 15 kilometers a day, and many of them died, and the last one to die was Brother Headley, although he nearly died at Umzilas, but he died in 1933, which is almost in my lifetime. Anybody else? Almost in my lifetime, not quite, but 1933, so there's a sort of almost a little link, a few years. So at any rate, that is what we're doing today, and I'm very grateful that you have come, grateful to Father Provincial for paying for this work, and that we set it up and remember our ancestors in the faith. Thank you very much.
The Spirit of God continues to speak to us today, and in our particular case as Jesuits in Southern Africa. since this stone was carved, the Spirit has redrawn our area of work and has brought us together as Jesuits in Mozambique, Jesuits in South Africa, Jesuits in Malawi, Jesuits in Zambia, Jesuits who will be in Botswana, who will be in Swaziland, who will be in Lesotho, to form one province. From the 21st of March next year, we will have a new territory called the Jesuit province of Southern Africa. And thanks to the work that was done by these brothers of ours, this commemoration helps us to thank God for the ways in which He leads us. So as we now unveil this plaque and bless it, we kindly ask for the permission of Father Ricketts. We invaded his territory. He remains the tall giant, having founded Chishawasha Mission. We continue to be under his shadow and under his wings, but we have brought to him and we have brought to everyone around here the Jesuits who planted the seed of this work and of the faith. Thank you.
August 1814. This plaque is erected to the memory of the first Jesuits of the Zambezi Mission, who 65 years later came to Zimbabwe to preach the good news about Jesus. Father Henry Depolchin, Superior, Belgium. Father Charles Cronenberg, Belgium. Brother Francis de Sandilia, Belgium. Brother Louis D. Vandler, Belgium. Father Salvatore Blanca, Italy. Brother Peter Paravicin, Italy. Father Charles Fatz, Germany. Father Anthony Torred, Germany. Brother Joseph Hurdley, England. Father Augustus Law, England. Brother Theodore Nig, Liechtenstein, 7 August 2014, AMDG. Go make disciples of all nations. Matthew chapter 28, verse 19.
Oh God, moved by your contemplation of the earth, you sent your Son into the world to accomplish the work of salvation. As we deepen our union as servants of Christ's mission in this region, grant us, we pray, interior freedom and generosity of heart to offer our best resources for the common mission, so that when your Son comes in glory, He may recognize our faithful service in His name and lead us to the glory of your kingdom, where you live and reign forever and ever. Amen.